Hey everyone, Mitchell Hora here with you. Thanks for joining us for a Topsoil podcast here today. We got a global Topsoil podcast going on today. I'm so excited. We've got all kinds of, I think, going to be amazing topics that we're going to hit on, different things to talk about here. And this has been kind of a long time coming that Ted and I have been talking back and forth. We got some crazy ideas going. We got some wild stuff happening. And it's like, all right, hey, let's get on a podcast. Let's talk about this. Let's start some more conversation and include you all and let you kind of see a little bit more about what's going on from a global perspective and what's happening when it comes to sustainability, finance, and kind of these issues all around the world, right? At Continuum Ag, we've been mostly talking about carbon intensity and policy here in the United States, but farmers and all of us should be aware of what's happening at a global perspective. And I think Ted's a perfect guy to explain that. And he's got some friends, some special guests joining us from the Ukraine, which is going to be amazing. We're going to get into that here in just a second. By means of quick intro, Continuum is a company that I started back in 2015. We're a software company helping farmers manage their data, quantify and verify their carbon intensity scores, and really tell their story. I think that's what this is all about, telling our story because other people want to hear that story and they might even want to be part of the financial opportunity surrounding that story. And I think that's where we can fit in as farmers. So, with that, we're going to kind of key this up a little bit, introduce my guests that I've got on today. We're going to talk about what's going on in the Ukraine. We're going to talk about 45Z. We're going to talk about just kind of some of this climate capital and investment happening at a global scale. Talk about policy here as well. But without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing the slide. I'll pop back and forth on them a little bit. But without further ado, Ted, why don't I start over with you? Introduce you, and you can introduce our guest friend that we've got here as well. But Ted, thanks for hopping on. Excited for this and take it away.
Mitchell, incredibly honored to be here and really grateful to be here in Kyiv, Ukraine. The courage and bravery of these people is just unsurpassed. And I'm here with Julia here. We're in Davos on addressing very similar topics, but in very different contexts. So I'll turn it over to her for a quick introduction and we can take it from there.
Yeah.
Hello, I'm Julia. I'm doing green projects in Ukraine, and for us it's a big challenge as we are now a candidate to European Union. We need to implement all these difficult things, all these issues that we never knew before, and now we are so hurry in it. And we want to be a sustainable country, and first that we should start is sustainable agriculture. So we are speaking about how to finance it, because Ukraine now is in a situation where we can't think about investment in business. We just need money to fight and to be independent again. But in the nearest future, we should solve it already now and prepare to be prepared.
How is what is the current state of agriculture in Ukraine? You know, how was the crop last year? Obviously, it's winter time there, just like it is here in the US. But what is the outlook on agriculture for the 2025 season? Is it looking
Okay,
promising and going to
you
be
know
okay?
that Ukraine all this time was the mother of grain to a lot of countries.
Yeah.
There is a conclusion of European Union that all biomass of Europe, 50% is Ukrainian. So it's a huge amount. And if we take the amounts, it's like 400,000 square kilometers under agricultural lands. You can imagine this 70% of our territory is under agricultural lands. All this time we used our land just to give more. We used a lot of fertilizers and we're not sustainable with our nature. And now we should change our mind, change our legislation, change everything to become more closer to climate.
Yeah. Yeah. I know there's been some of our buddies that have been a friend of the show before, Lauren Steinlage, for example. He's been over to the Ukraine a couple different times, educating farmers about no-till, about cover crops, about regenerative ag practices. So that's great that there's that realization that, hey, we should be looking at some of these other practices. But Julia, you mentioned the European kind of push and now maybe requirement for that too. If Ukraine is going to become part of the EU, you're kind of now forced to really have to look at more of these things rather than just have it be a little bit more voluntary. Is that what's driving this conversation more? And is there a lot of talk about that from the farmers themselves?
Farmers now are very nervous because they understand how difficult regulations have European Union. They are in shock because it's only 3 years delay to implement of tax for emission for farmers, and it will kill them without correct decisions which will help them. Europe already has all this mechanism, all these credits, donations and grants. Ukraine is just thinking about it, but in 3 years we already will pay these taxes for emission, and we have 70% of our territory under agriculture, so it's awful.
It could be a big thing. So that's a carbon tax, right? Where based on the fertilizer being used, the fuel being used, it could be a big expense. But at least there's a couple years now to learn, to figure that out, and to be prepared for it. And I know there's been, protests in Europe and stuff when they implement these things and don't have any type of window to prepare for it. That's when it's even worse than at least knowing that there's 3 years. But Julie, let me back up a little bit. Explain exactly who you are and what you do, or the company you're with, or whatever that may be. Explain kind of more exactly who you are.
I'm a person who is thinking about nature, and I'm a private person who decided in 2019 to move in green way, and we took in rent, and then we bought the plot near Kiev with all documents which led us to construct the waste recycling plant, and we are moving in this way. We are registered the eco-industrial park together with Boyarka Municipal, and we are solving the different problems of municipal near Kiev. It's only 15 kilometers from Kiev. We are solving the problem of waste, agricultural waste, solid municipal waste, and also sewing sludge in this project. We are going to do it in nearest years and to have possibility to give the documents to our farmers when they will bring us for utilization the waste from their fields, to give them the papers, and these papers will be calculated during the calculating of tax for emissions, and it
Okay.
will help either agriculture and municipals.
I see. So the concept being, there's a variety of things happening in the US and globally when it comes to ag and food and other municipal wastes, right? And being able to take that waste and create biofuel out of it or biogas out of it or green methane or whatever. So the concept being, hey, rather than waste this agricultural residue or whatever it may be, you can utilize it to create some of these renewable energy sources and then create basically carbon credits based on the delta, right? That's the concept.
It's true. Our concept is waste to methanol, so
Okay,
chemical
methanol.
molecule, waste to molecule, and we will produce methanol. We have a huge supply inside our country. Methanol is used in chemical, in producing the materials for thermomodernization, in producing of military things. A lot of military explosives and all this need this product, and also it can be used in producing SAF, sustainable aviation fuel and to produce the fuel for shipping.
Yeah.
After war, our cargo will and logistic will gain again.
Yeah, for sure. No, it makes a ton of sense. I'm definitely following on, being able to take these things that would have been waste before and create a green e-methanol fuel out of it that can be utilized for fuel, for sustainable aviation fuel, for green marine fuel, for other heavy transport, or for all these other purposes and stuff as well. That love it. Ted, why don't I toss it back over to you? Introduce yourself a little bit more and like what you actually do, because it's a it's a big hat that you're wearing, number one. But introduce yourself and kind of how this came to be and what the heck you're doing in the Ukraine, because this is not usually where you and I are talking from.
No, typically not, Mitchell, but it's incredibly to be talking with you from Kyiv here. So the big issues that, we're just at Davos and the World Economic Forum, the main theme was geopolitical stability, and then right up alongside that was climate. Climate has been the big theme for a number of years, and so everything that I'm doing is central to climate and cross-sector decarbonization. So agriculture is a hard to abate sector. So just to kind of, a little bit about myself and what I'm doing. So I'm a credit analyst. I was on Wall Street for a number of years. I went into climate and at the intersection of climate objectives and capital markets, really. So at Davos, there was we had a multi-sector strategy. So we've had a successful soft launch to our climate fund, Repower Holdings. So we are that is taking a lot of practices that have come out of the European sector and deploying them in the United States. And then on the agricultural side of things, for a number, I have been working with mobilizing capital to the climate sector. So the carbon markets, as you know, are illiquid, they're inefficient, and they're not transparent. And so our team at Captariant has been basically started with the principle of leveraging the fixed income markets to scale high quality projects. So what we're looking at here in Kyiv with this waste to energy, so a big focus of one of my top focuses, Mitchell, has been mobilizing capital to decarbonize hard to abate sectors. And real estate is a hard to abate sector, agriculture, manufacturing, heavy industry. And so what our premise is that we are going to leverage the power of the fixed income market to scale high quality projects. And basically what that means is if you go straight to the carbon markets for a high quality project, I don't think the carbon markets are functioning properly. And again, stop me if I'm going into too much detail here, but I think a really good analogy would be, if you look at the mortgage market before the mortgage-backed security, there was no mortgage market. A bank created a mortgage and it stayed on the balance sheet. But then the mortgage-backed security created liquidity for the mortgage market and homeownership for people, which was a really good thing. And like with many good things, Wall Street will push that envelope on that 14 ways to Friday. But with the mortgage-backed security, you were able to get liquidity into the housing markets and increase homeownership. And that was very good to an extent, but if done responsibly, it's very good. Now, the analogy here is this. In 2008, it was risk off on everything from alt-A to prime and subprime. And what we're seeing is kind of a risk off in carbon markets. And I'm not trying to be too broad, but that's very meaningful to agriculture, because agriculture needs capital to deepen this, the decarbonization for the things that you are doing and other people. So what we are doing is basically saying, okay, we need something like the mortgage-backed security, except for carbon markets. So we've taken high quality projects based on engineered solutions like this waste to energy project. This is an engineered, scientifically verified impact where you can take the pool of environmental assets and embed that in a green use of proceeds bond. Now you're not relying on the carbon markets. You're actually the carbon markets are relatively small, but now you're relying on a market that's over $100 trillion to scale that. So you use the power of the fixed income market to deepen the decarbonization impact. And so what we're doing with Yulia's project is we're taking the pool of environmental assets that are created and embedding that in a green use of proceeds bond, and then that will create and then that for the first two projects, and we are then creating a replicable, scalable solution, because investors want, what investors will get is a green use of proceeds bond with a carbon enhanced return, and Julia as a project developer gets an enhanced liquidity and better pricing than she would have if she just went directly to the carbon market. So really, Mitchell, to sum up what I'm doing, it's leveraging the power of the fixed income markets to scale decarbonization, because we want to meet the European policy objectives of the taxonomy. We want to meet we want to leverage the green bond standard, and we want to address Article 6 out of Paris. So this is the way to do it.
That's awesome. Yeah, and of course, as people are probably starting to put two and two together, this is where we've been talking as well, right? Can we take the concept of 45Z, quantifying on-farm carbon intensity, quantifying on-farm carbon reductions, and could there be better markets to back getting more of that created, right? That's the concept, obviously, what we've been talking. Now it's been, all right, maybe 45Z for the US and the tax credit, that creates the liquid cash, right? Tax credit is, I think, would be in replacement of the green bond, right? Is that kind of what it could be for the US piece anyway? Or
I'm not sure if it might be a compliment. I think it would be a compliment.
Yeah. Because you could still have the green bond up front to be able to get it going, and then you could cash out essentially by generating the tax credit.
Yes.
Could be a way to do it. So, okay, talk about, talk a little bit more about, okay, we've got a great example here, right? We've got a green waste program that is going to create decarbonization. We can create green bonds around that. Very stable, very known financial tool, right? Are you seeing a lot of interest in this? And maybe speak to, I mean, you've been all over Europe, all over the world getting this to go. Is that green bond, you're calling it the just more stable, the fixed income side of things. Is that a lot easier sell and taking off more than trying to get companies to buy carbon credits?
Absolutely, Mitchell, you nailed it, because the fixed income markets are very liquid, and so the demand for green investment outstrips supply by many multiples. So I think that what we are addressing is a number of things. I think number one, from a humanitarian level, I think the first order of business is we want to get resources to Ukraine, and the more and I think that the story here with something like this on a project level is about the recovery of Ukraine from a humanitarian perspective, the economic perspective, the climate perspective, and the industry perspective. But I think from when you're talking about the vehicle to drive that, I think you want to let the fixed income markets drive that, because we are working on a sovereign level, we're working on state and municipal levels, and so we've been meeting with mayors throughout a number of towns where we can create, we can scale and replicate these projects. And I think the idea is this: that the demand for green investment creates an opportunity to sort of capture what I call climate transition alpha, because there's so much demand for a green investment and the supply really isn't meeting that demand, because I think investor standards are very high. Sure. And the reason that we're doing what we're doing at Capturient is because we created a high standard for environmental assets. So, and we believe that environmental assets are just one piece of the capital structure. So with a project like this, waste to energy, we rely on the fixed income markets and use the environmental assets as a complement to that, because we think the fixed income markets are going to move this forward. And I think the demand and supply imbalance here is really going to drive very, very favorable dynamics for people like Julia here and for other people that are doing projects based on engineered solutions, because the things like Mitchell in EU, they have SFDR Article 9, which is a very deep green designation, and there really aren't that many funds doing that. And I think that the large scale investors, they don't want incremental improvements. They want transformational, circular, regenerative solutions, just like we're doing here in Kyiv, in Ukraine.
Love it. Good question from starting to come into the chat, and thanks folks for definitely put some questions in the chat here, or use the Q&A function. A anonymous Zoom user, what are they looking at from the investors? Like, what's their return on investment? Like, is that basically the concept here, right? They're buying a bond, it's got a set interest amount that they are going to make back, and it's just basically based on that, not necessarily selling them carbon credits. The carbon credits are separate. They're basically just providing financing. They bought the green bonds and then they're
Well,
recurring some interest back on them, right? That's
yes.
and Julia and other projects have capital, right? They bought the they got capital, they issued green bonds, and then they're paying that back with a percentage of interest over time. Is that right?
So I think, yeah, Michelle, I think that's the way to think about it because the investor is getting a green use of proceeds bond that has a carbon enhanced return.
Yeah,
So they
yeah.
get the principal and interest that they typically would get, but the coupon has an environmental asset attached to it. So an engineered carbon credit.
Yep.
So they get a cash coupon with an engineered credit attached that they can either trade or retire.
Yep.
So it's a carbon enhanced return that the investors are getting alongside the green bond.
Love it. So, Julia, how's this work on you guys' stuff? What's your business model going to be in this? It's selling the e-methanol. Is that like the main way that you guys are going to make money, or is there money to be made by collaborating with the farmers on this somehow as well?
The heart of profit is inside the eco-industrial park because behind the gasification plant waste to methanol, we have also a lot of participants in the eco-industrial park who buy methanol from us. And the main idea is to have a center of profit on the infrastructural company who will manage the electricity processes, the water consumption, the problem with sewage, steam, extra heat, and that's all. It's a very good business and it's a very good profits.
Yeah.
If we take, we are talking only about the plant like waste to methanol. It's usually in the structure of this. Usually there is a big part of grant because this financial model is not very interesting. Yes, but all other parts of this park can give a good profits to investors and to participants.
Okay. So it's a big picture kind of thing all over the place. Is the farm, when you guys are bringing in some of the waste from the farmers, is there a
Uh,
business transaction that happens there? Do they pay or do they get paid?
Usually it's mixed scheme. It depends on the time. Now in Europe they buy waste, they buy the municipal waste, they buy agricultural waste. Now the situation in Ukraine is like we all our waste goes to landfills and they pay money to be accepted in landfills. Now
Yeah.
they at the beginning in the plan they will pay to us, then it will be zero, then maybe we will buy. We will see it according to time and according to making our financial model, and we will have memorandums and contracts with input contractors, and we will decide all these questions during our preparation. But now they pay to be utilized.
Yeah, that's awesome. Another anonymous attendee. What about are you the questions in regards to methane avoidance tax credits, but are you creating methane avoidance tax credits, right? It would have gone to the landfill and would have caused carbon emissions versus now you're avoiding that and you're actually utilizing something out of it. Are you generating a carbon credit off of that or not necessarily?
Uh, I didn't.
I think I think it depends on what jurisdiction. I mean, and not, yeah, I think
It
it
will
would.
be step-by-step
Yeah.
implementation of taxes, so it's scale.
Yeah, yeah.
It will be like in scale, yes.
So this is more so about avoiding the the carbon tax is
Yes,
the carrot
yes.
here. It's more about avoiding the carbon tax that the farmers who are currently taking their waste and it goes to a landfill, they're going to get a carbon tax on that. So right now they
If they
pay.
put it to landfills, they don't have anything, and their tax will be big because it doesn't matter, or it
That's right.
make emission from the field, or it make emission from the landfill.
Yep.
But if they will bring and to the plant where it will be recycled, we will give them a paper, and they can be eliminate the tax.
Yeah,
From the
yeah.
tax.
So it may
Yep.
not be
Yep.
the one-to-one, may not be a one-to-one answer, but I think that, the point is the certification that she provides enables the farmer to avoid the tax.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think we got it there, right? It's not farmers wanting to do this necessarily to generate a carbon credit. It's avoiding the stick, right? Avoiding the carbon tax of the European Union is part of what we're looking at here.
Exactly.
Um, Now that it makes a ton of sense, and obviously it's different, right? In the U.S., we don't have a carbon tax at all, right? So this concept is very different. We don't have the stick that's driving some of this decarbonization. We only have a couple different emerging opportunities for the carrot, but
Mhm.
it's really important to for all of us here to be learning and taking key notes on this because we see our neighbors to the north, Canada, they have a carbon tax, very similar kind of thing. Obviously, we're not going to get one in the US anytime soon, but they've sure been proposed before. And I don't know what they have in California. They might have they have versions of it out there, I believe. But yeah, really interesting to hear, okay, how that stick is now incentivizing, okay, let's get this agricultural waste into something that's actually useful. In this case, the e-methanol. Now the user is asking about there's an attendee asking about the toxicity of methanol of this e-methanol. How is that kind of being factored in? Is that a concern of just this e-methanol being utilized as a fuel, or is some of I'm not an expert in it at all. I have no idea if it on the
Methanol,
risks of it
you
or
can
toxicity of it, but is that a concern?
the difference between e-methanol and
Oh,
or how can it be used?
Sorry, I'm calling it e-methanol because I've heard it
so
called e-methanol in the past, and maybe it's not. It's just methanol. I'm
yeah, the toxicity of methanol. I mean, I think, yeah,
The
I mean,
the formula of methanol is the same. It's
yeah, yeah.
e-methanol and methanol, the same thing.
Yep.
But as when it's green and when it's made of waste, the price of it in Europe, because Europe now pay extra for products which are made in a
Renewable.
green way and
Yep.
from green input. So, for example, if methanol on exchange from natural gas costs about up to 400 euro, the green methanol you can have 350 euro extra and more.
Yep.
So, for example, Maersk buy for 750 euro, Shell buy for 2000 euro per for green methanol.
Yep. Got it. Got it. So and thanks for this our Zoom user friend here. Putting in the methanol, one atom, ethanol, two atoms. Here's the actual chemical makeup of them, but it's all based on carbon, right? At the end of the day, these are all carbon-based molecules, and most of them have been created previously from fossil sources. Now we're just talking about it from renewable sources. Ted, let's talk a little bit about like the 45Z stuff, right? And kind of drawing a connection here. Some of this US ethanol is looking at going into Europe, where this same market driver could be affecting us here in the US, right? So, am I thinking about this the right way? Europe already has some of their next generation biofuel, next generation fuels. I think that's what they call it, right? So next generation fuels is their low carbon fuel markets, and they have their standards that are the ISCC standards, right? It's their audit and verification standards. And American ethanol or any renewable biofuels, they could go into these markets and be able to generate this same type of premium for being a low carbon fuel to offset these companies that are paying a carbon tax because they're buying high carbon fuel. If you blend in low carbon fuel, you don't have as much carbon tax, therefore
Mhm.
it's a premium on the low carbon fuel, right? So if we could produce more low carbon fuel in the US or in Ukraine or wherever, we could help to supply more low carbon fuel into that and utilize the same stick driver, but to incentivize the production of more low carbon ethanol and other biofuels. Is that or sustainable aviation fuel, right? Is that where you see there being some opportunity? Are we onto
Yeah,
something?
absolutely. I do think that I do think there's a lot of opportunity there. I think that the policy frameworks and there's a strong political will in the EU for the climate transition. And I think that there's also very strong private sector tailwinds. So I think in the United States we're going to be turning more to the private sector. The private sector is going to be doing more of the heavy lifting in the United States. And I think just to maybe point on this, I don't, maybe not a tangent, but I think Mitchell, I think a private sector led, markets for low carbon fuels are really going to be the way forward, because I think the EU has done an outstanding job of creating policy frameworks and incentives, but some of the sensibilities are that they created the policies, but then the regulations and the verification, the validation and the frameworks and this and that, it has gone so far that some people that have wanted to decarbonize are like, wait, we're not sure if we want to do it because we're on the hook for so much reporting, because when the policies were being made, every academic, every scientist, every NGO wanted to have their little say and wanted to say, oh, well, you got to think about this and that. And then what happened was you had massive regulations that actually did the opposite thing that the policy was intended to do. So I think that what we need is more private capital. What we need is what you're doing here in the private sector, Mitchell, is incredible, and we need private capital to lead the way, because even when you go into the multilateral sector, a lot of the multilateral development banks, they have balance sheet capacity of, if you look at the top banks, they have $100 billion of unused balance sheet, and this is what they're supposed to be doing. So let's let the private sector lead the way. Let's take some examples of what they're doing here in Ukraine, and do that in the United States, and let's take some examples of what you're doing in the United States and do that here in Ukraine.
Ted, we just got to tell the banks we only need like half of what they got. Like that's all. Come
Exactly.
on.
Yeah, exactly.
Come on. No, I think you're spot on, right? So how could this go? Is there things that we can be kind of doing today to encourage us? Obviously, you're deep into that, and you and I have had some of these conversations, but like, is this still pretty far out down the road, or are there more things that are really starting to happen now?
Well, I think a couple things would be, I think that the standards that we are pushing for in terms of green bonds and in terms of environmental assets will do a lot, because investors want very high standards. So I think number one, high standards for how do you define green,
Okay.
and number two, good transparency. Okay, so I think the foundation to mobilizing capital to the green sector is having a high standard for green,
Yep.
and we have in the European and EU, there's multiple different frameworks for multiple industries, and the same in the US. And I think if you have a high standard that's simple, then you will get capital, because one thing the fixed income markets love is reliability, and investors are demanding a high standard for green.
Got it. And so, kind of to your point too, it's a high standard, but not overly cumbersome, overly burdensome, like what you were referring to
The
before.
green
With
impact is high, but the regulatory and the administrative
yeah,
burden is not. It
yeah.
doesn't preclude somebody. Yeah.
And that's kind of what we've seen now. I mean, we've been, as you know, right, and a lot of folks on here, we've been chasing decarbonizing United States grains to be used in biofuel, like ethanol, and creating low carbon corn going to ethanol. We're in the final stages of getting third party verified low carbon certificates issued. It's due back to us by Saturday. We'll see, being able to do that. And we were able to do it at Continuum Ag, where we don't have a whole bunch of money. We don't have a whole bunch of expertise in this, and we don't have a whole bunch of people and a bunch of incredible stuff. And we were able to do it to the tune of tens of millions of bushels at a very, very low cost, but high sense of rigor using the ISO for, these ISO standards that are like, they are the cream of the crop, and using a accredited third party verifier who's the cream of the crop. Like, it really wasn't that hard, I think. In my perspective, it was hard. It sucked. It was a lot of work. It was expensive, but like we were able to do it in, I don't know, 8 months, and like it wasn't that overwhelming of a thing. And now we know how to do it, and we can rinse and repeat and do it again. So, is that the type of thing that you're kind of talking about? Like, hey, have a rigorous audit and verification protocol, but just keep it simple and don't try to have all the, and that's what I think is wrong, right? When the carbon markets, right? Where you've got to have all this, certainty around permanence and leakage, and you got to have all these insurance pools or whatever, right? And you got to have all these additional backings. You got to work with this registry and this verifier and this, all these different things, and it costs more money to create the credit or create the outcome than what it's worth, and it
Well,
didn't do anything.
Well, I think you're bringing up a good point here, and so I think the idea. I mean, we have the carbon markets are quirky, they're fragmented, they're disorganized, they're illiquid, and so the way to overcome that is to have a high standard on engineered, scientifically verified projects, because with an engineered product that's coming out of waste to energy, you can scientifically verify that a ton of GHG reduction. Okay, and then the way to overcome that is to tie that in with the bond part of the capital structure, because the bond markets, unlike, are super efficient. And so what we're doing, Mitchell, just very simply is, we have an environmental asset platform that sits alongside an investment bank, we have carbon market research and valuation. We have a carbon asset manager, and we also have an index on Bloomberg, because when she does an environmental asset, that's going to be placed in our clear rating ESCI, Engineered Solution Index, on Bloomberg. And once an institutional investor can go to the Bloomberg terminal, and our index is currently out there right now, they can see that they have transparency. And that's exactly, these are the kind of things that we need to get moving, that we need
Yeah.
to get capital from the sidelines into decarbonization.
It's an extra carrot, right? It's marketing on the investment, right? So they're investing in something that they're going to see some financial returns, but you're also showing them, here's the sustainability outcomes that we are creating. And it sounds like sometimes they might be actually buying that outcome, and they could utilize it themselves in their own carbon accounting, or they could sell it. Or it's a bonus basically to say, hey, here's what we did with your money. You got a return, but also here's the awesome outcome that we created as well, that gives them a feel good story, but shows that they actually did some good. So, so trying to draw a proxy to, okay, so let's kind of pull things back in a little bit. We're already working towards kind of running out of time here, but um, from a kind of global policy kind of side of things as well, is it kind of in Europe anyway, kind of sitting and settling out right now, or is there a lot of crazy new steps happening from a policy perspective to push this even further?
Well, so I think the Europe has now made a push to simplify their policy framework. And again, having a policy framework is a very good thing, because when the EU created their taxonomy, then I think you now have one in over 40 other countries. So now you have the EU led. So from a policy perspective, from an international perspective, I think you've had that blueprint that's been propagated in other countries. And some countries may say, well, we want our definition of green to be a little bit deeper. And what has happened since then, since you had the taxonomy proliferate on an international level, you've had sovereign level green bond issuance. So over 50 sovereigns have issued green use of proceeds bonds. And then once that happens, once a sovereign leads the way, then the banking sector typically follows. And the banking sector is the second largest issuer. So from an international policy perspective, when you have sovereign level policy, and then the sovereign leading with a green bond issuance, then it leads the way for banks to then do green bond issuance. and then typically after banks, the industry follows. That's typically what we see on country perspective. So we think that Ukraine can lead the way with high standards because they have to rebuild, and they want to rebuild at very high standards.
Yeah.
And the policies can be a floor to that. And I think that that's what they've done. And then the markets have said, well, we know what the floor is, but here's where we want our green performance to be.
Got it. And the question, I think our Zoom user person's name of Carl here, but ask about what about the insurance or the interest rate on those? Like, is a green bond interest rate versus like regular bank financing interest rate? Are they about the same?
Well, great question. Sometimes you'll see there's been a couple what they call twin bond issuances. So the German sovereign did a twin bond issuance where they did two like-for-like bonds on a matched basis. They were identical in all aspects except one was green, and there was a small greenium there. So
nice.
Can I answer that in two
Gosh, the
phases?
Germans being so cute. Look at the Germans being cute.
Yeah. So what that did was it kind of proved the academics behind it, and then once it's proved at that level, then you have banks, and then you have the industry. They'll kind of follow and say, okay, but I mean, Mitchell, nobody's really going to issue a green bond because of a basis point or two differential or 7 to 10 basis points. I think the driver is because again at a project level, even if it's the appetite for green investment and the ability to capture climate transition alpha, because again you're capturing pent up demand, capital that's sitting on the sidelines. And once projects meet the standard of green that investors are looking for, they get really good terms. Okay, and then I'll answer that the second part just very briefly. There's a difference between a greenium on a bond and a green valuation differential, and that's the valuation differential between green and non-green on a project basis. For example, if you take a real estate project, can be very wide. So I think this was an incredible question here, because I think what we're going to see, Mitchell, at some point here is the valuation differential between green and non-green on physical assets like real estate is getting so wide, because on a green asset that brings in a higher net operating income from, say, tenants that are willing to pay more rent or higher leasing velocity or higher occupancy, combined with lower cap rates, that means that a property you had that would have had a net operating income of $1 million on a 5 cap, if you have an NOI of $1.2 million on a 4 cap, your conventional property was $20 million, but your green property is worth over $30 million. I mean, that's a big gap, and some of that you're not seeing in the market because evaluation practices haven't caught up with green in terms of comping green properties to other green properties. But Mitchell, I think the big point in this is when you talk about greenium and green versus non-green, I think we're getting to a point where we could have a minxie moment where really the markets are going to say, oh, the upside of green investment really hasn't been priced in, and the downside of the climate risk and brown investment has really not been priced in. And so when you price in the green upside along with the brown downside, it could be a big difference. And once you large banks and financial institutions start looking at that and they say, well, some of these assets have a risk of being stranded, that means there's a fair value hit, and higher capital requirements. And the combination of that, you could be looking at a minxie moment where there's a sharp devaluation in non-green assets.
Sure. No, definitely tracking, right? So being able to look at, okay, here's this asset, right? Whether we're talking about producing methanol like Julia's doing, I'm thinking about producing ethanol and stuff here, right? Or sustainable aviation fuel, probably even more so. Some of these different things where, okay, a facility to produce sustainable aviation fuel versus a facility to produce regular jet fuel, they both could be able to create some returns. They both could be able to be an investable asset, but one of them could issue green bonds to be able to get their capital to be able to build this thing out. One of them wouldn't necessarily be able to do that. The investors might be able to get similar returns in either one. But yeah, what's the longer term, big picture opportunity of a growing sustainable aviation fuel market versus not as much of an incentive in a regular jet fuel market, right? So interesting deal. I mean, Chill's trying to figure out from my side, right? Like, how do we how do we get this money down to the farmers? How do we get money
Yes.
to
Yes. Thank you.
incentivize? How do we get money
Question.
to
Tomorrow we have
incentivize?
meeting with Minister of Agriculture of Ukraine, and I want
Yeah.
he ask this question, and
Yeah.
we will try to find a decision for him. Now we will make a repetition, okay?
So we're going to take your question to the agricultural minister of Ukraine.
Yeah, let's do it. Um, because I'm trying to think about it here, right? And Ted, as you and I've talked before, it's like, gosh, dang. Okay, so I'm thinking about it like, all right, could Continuum go and try to create some kind of a green bond offering, right? I don't know if we could. The only thing that comes to mind is we have a lot of farmers who have RCI certificates and stuff, or who are interested in doing that. Could they basically be paid up front
Yep.
for creating those certificates with the money that we got from the green bonds?
Yep.
Then there's a fund or whatever that now owns these certificates. And then
Yes.
when they get turned around and sold, that creates a financial upside, and it pays back the interest owed on the green bonds, while at the same time creating an amazing story about all the farmers we were able to help and the decarbonization efforts that we created. And there you go. I think that's the concept. My
Well, it
track,
is, and
but
that's
it's not a
exactly what I
physical
was.
thing though. It's not a physical thing. Like Julia's got a real physical facility that has
Exactly.
land, it has some assets to it. Like, does that matter?
No, what you're saying is spot on. And I was talking about that exact issue with somebody here yesterday because a lot of the things, Mitchell, that we're going to have to do to restore the land here in Ukraine involves things like demining. I mean, and that you can't go and issue debt or equity to say I'm going to demine because the model doesn't really work. But we came up with an instrument. We had a session last night where we spent probably about 90 minutes just freeform abstract creative thinking on financial markets and things like that, and we created some mechanisms that we believe can it's kind of like what you're talking about, where you there's a need for something to happen, but the debt markets really aren't the place for it, the equity markets aren't the place for it, but there are mechanisms that we can do where we can create a credit that an individual project manager can issue that restores the land in Ukraine. And the credit that we're looking at creating here for Ukraine would be a credit that incentivizes somebody who's demining the land and restoring the land to do it to do it efficiently and swiftly, and the faster somebody achieves their results, then the higher the value would get, because the value is based on the future proceeds of the use of the land. So that means
Okay.
if top efficient land restoration companies would get high value from a market like that. And I think it's kind of like what you're talking about in kind of in a different context.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, rewarding, okay, who can get there further faster, right? Same
Yeah.
as whether it be decarbonizing ethanol and going further faster, decarbonizing corn, soybeans, wheat, going further faster, whatever it may be, right? So interesting. The biggest thing that I'm thinking about, right, is for the US, that 45Z piece that we want would be the outcome that is required to pay back the green bond, right? And to be able to create the financial upside to be able to make this all go. We don't have 45Z right now. We don't have final rules. They're still waiting and pending. So the problem is, like, sure, we could go create a whole bunch of low carbon CI certificates. We get a big volume of stuff. We could go and issue out hundreds of millions of dollars in creating these assets. But then where are we going to actually get them sold into, right, and be able to monetize them? Where, like in Julia's side, she's got buyers for the green methanol, right? There's multiple different options there, or at least in very close proximity. And as you're looking to the long term, like there's going to be direct demand for that methanol, right? Where the problem for right now is there's a potential demand for low carbon corn, but right now, like it's not quite, So that's just where my head's out of like, okay, gosh, there's got to be something here, but it's so close, but it's not right now. Unless there's a different way to basically take that same attribute and that attribute gets monetized in a different manner that's not reliant on a carbon tax or a tax
Mhm.
credit or whatever, right? Same thing on Julia's side, right? If it wasn't a European Union stick, right, and carbon tax, is there still upside in somebody else just from the private sector that still wants to see this through and basically them buying the outcome, right?
Yeah, and
Buying
I
the
think that
story, buying the
there,
data.
I think that there is, Mitchell, and I think what you're doing is incredible because I think that there is a pathway to get to get capital in there to monetize what you're doing because I think as you and I spoke, so many large companies are demanding that the agriculture that they get from farms has a low carbon content. And
Yeah.
big suppliers have already set their decarbonization targets, which means that what they're buying from farms should be low carbon.
Yeah.
So I think that there's a
It's got to be.
mechanism.
It's got
Yeah.
to be there. It's got to be there. Yeah, it's super, super interesting to be able to see that. And Julie, maybe back to you on like so in the US, right, farmers are really being pushed to adopt things like no-till and cover crops and try to improve our water quality and stuff like that. Is more of that happening in the Ukraine, or are you guys going to find out more of that when you talk with your ag minister here tomorrow?
So many years we used the land for the biggest amount of grains.
Yeah.
So now it's very weak, and the problem is that now it's only the process of giving the passports of the land to farmers. In these passports, they will schedule on further 5 years what types of grape should be the passport of land.
Yeah.
I know that you have already this, but in 3 years they will implement these taxes. So our farmers are like they don't have passports for land. They are not ready to pay taxes, and everything is coming, and we are in shock, and we are working hard. Our legislation is ready, but farmers and mentality is not ready yet.
Yeah.
But we're working
Yeah.
with it.
Where my head goes to, right, is a farmer is worried about that tax. Is it clear how they will be taxed? Like what is their current emissions and what is their score around their current emissions versus what do they need to do to decarbonize and avoid the tax? Is that like methodology
Now we
clear
are
on
just
how to calculate that?
implementing. Now we are just implementing the existing European methodics. So
Got it.
we will not manage it ourselves. They will
Yep.
give us all they have. But European economics, it's one situation. Ukraine, after war, after all the things, has another situation, and they want us the same equal standards, and it is impossible. They
Yeah.
should think about us.
Yeah. I mean, you guys were literally saying, I think right before we popped on, that there was even missiles dropping and you guys were hearing them last time. And this is still ongoing
And
situation. And hopefully with some work towards resolution here sometime soon so that farmers can not have to worry about being bombed while they're sleeping and instead be able to start working towards recuperating that land and getting things fixed.
USA made, like for corn farmers, yes. When it's a lot of corn and the price is small, they sell it to ethanol. When it's high prices, they sell it like corn. So USA has its correct support of farmers.
Right.
Here, we should only think about all this mechanism, and we like business and like municipals are trying to make such projects who will give possibility to receive these papers, green papers, to eliminate these taxes and all this to farmers before the government can it's also on the way, but when they will be ready we don't know,
Yeah.
to
No,
support.
it's been super, super interesting. And yeah, for farmers there looking at avoiding that stick for us in the US also, there's no stick today, but not saying that there isn't going to be one, but there's some carrots that are out there today. And I think there's opportunity to keep tapping into all of this. So I'm excited have more conversation and follow up, see what you guys learn throughout the rest of Ted, throughout the rest of your time in the Ukraine, and Julia. I mean, definitely been great to meet you here. And it sounds like what you guys have going on is awesome. And I mean, Ted, you started with it, right? The resiliency of the Ukrainian people and the push to look beyond, right? The push to look towards the future and continue to build a better future. I mean, it's amazing. It's
It
amazing.
is. Yeah, Mitchell, it's just the if you take the courage and the bravery and the resolve that they have here on geopolitical matters and think about what that can do on an industrial level, I mean, it's like the sky's the limit. And I
Yeah,
think, I think there's a lot of opportunity there I think there's opportunity for what you're doing here in Ukraine with your solution. I think there's opportunity what Julia's doing in the United States, and I
yeah,
definitely think because she's solving one problem, you're solving another, and if you
absolutely.
and you could, I think there are so many ways that you could scale what you're doing here in Ukraine and use that as an example in this region in Europe. And I think it's great to see that coming from the United States. It's great to see what you're doing coming from the United States. Great to see what Julia is doing from Ukraine. And it's incredible to be here having this conversation.
Been awesome. Been awesome. Thanks you guys for joining us, and looking forward to maybe a re or a follow up in the future here as this goes. Thanks everyone for joining us here today. This has been a lot of fun. Really interesting for me, like just to think about it from a global perspective like this. Just the insights are incredible. If you for farmers, if you want to get your carbon intensity score and start kind of putting some numbers to some of what we were talking about here today, you can do that for free at topsoil.ag. We will have a lot more webinars coming up. I do our chit chats every Tuesday at 7:45 Central Time every Tuesday morning. So join us there if you do have more questions. But thanks everybody for hanging out here today. We will catch you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Take care.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone.